Hello and welcome back, Moon Lovers. This is a video series for my newest workbook, Moon Wisdom. And if you were watching this during Cancer season of 2020, then we have just moved into a first quarter moon. If you're watching this at any other time, the first quarter moon, it all still applies for every first quarter moon. So with a first quarter moon, it's often mistaken, some people call it a half moon. But it's not a half moon. It's the first quarter. It's 25% through its orbit, and from our view from Earth, it looks like a half of a circle, which is why it's called a half moon. But technically, a full moon would be a half moon, because we can see one full half of the moon during a full moon. Even though it looks completely illuminated to us. So just some very simple differentiations there. So the first quarter moon, we're 50% through the illumination, we're 50% through the waxing half of the moon cycle, and this is the third phase, which is a yan phase of the moon's cycle. This is the most important phase up until this point, and as we go through, all of the phases are important, but this is the most important. And the reason for that is because this is when we take the big actions. This is when we walk the walk, talk the talk, when we make solid actions towards the intentions and goals that we set out for ourselves in the dreaming and the planning phases of the moon cycle. So this is when we financially invest. This is when we put our name down. This is when we commit to something in a really, really big way, or it's our first day of quitting smoking, or whatever it is that your intention or goal was. This is when you really take the action towards it and make it solid. So the reason that this is the most important is because this is the test. And this is the time when your brain and all of your fears are just going to kind of come crashing in on you. And this may not happen to you, but honestly, these patterns are universal and they happen to all humans. They happen to Oprah, they happen to Tony Robbins, they happen to all the people that you consider the most successful and the most confident. They still go through the same patterns as you do, as do I. And so in this pattern, in this part of the moon cycle, and in this part of moving forward with a goal and an intention, this is when the self-doubt comes in. And so the more aware that we can be that we are going to be experiencing these emotions, these feelings of self-doubt, we're going to be having negative coping mechanisms coming up, such as like staying in bed for 2 days, or binge eating food, or all of our negative coping mechanisms. But if we can be aware that this is coming, and we can stay super self-aware, and we know what our negative coping mechanisms are, then maybe, just maybe, we can make it through this phase without canceling out all of the work that we did in the dreaming and the planning phases, without quitting on our dreams, quitting on our goals, quitting on our intentions, without saying, oh, I don't have time for this right now, or making up some kind of excuse. And sometimes there are legitimate reasons not to move forward with things, but the majority of the time, it isn't legitimate. The majority of the time, unless you've gotten hit by a car or something like that, or you've experienced a death in your family, then you need to push through and make these solid commitments. You don't have to overcommit yourself, which is something that we talk about in every single phase. So if you feel like you're overwhelmed and like you've taken on too much, you can again take this time to assess and say, okay, I'm going to move forward with some things, but not all at this time. So we prioritize what are the most important action steps that I want to move forward with for this cycle. And as long as you keep moving forward, even if it's just a little bit, just keep pressing forward. Make one commitment, make one big action. Oh, I got something in my eye. Then you're good. Just keep pressing forward. Don't allow that monkey brain to come in and fill you up with all of that self-doubt, all of those negative coping mechanisms, all of those reasons why you shouldn't be doing it. Oh, I don't have enough money, or I don't have enough time, or I don't have enough support, whatever it is. We need to push through these perceived barriers, because 99% of the time they're perceived barriers. They're something that we unintentionally create roadblocks for ourselves and brick walls that are really, really hard to push through. And like I said, if you've taken on too much and you're feeling overwhelmed, let's just take a small action forward, a small one. Zone it in. What is one small action that I can take? Signing up for one class, one course, something solid to help you move forward. So in the workbook, we talk a lot about this. We talk a lot about calling it by its name. So calling it by its name is saying, I am self-aware enough to know that my negative coping mechanisms are coming in. Mine personally is junk food and Netflix. When I'm trying to avoid something, I get in my bed and I will spend 2-3 days straight there if I need to avoid whatever it is that I'm trying to avoid. And in that time, I'm gonna have Oreos, I'm gonna order Uber Eats, I'm gonna have all of these things because that is the way that I deal. Those are my negative coping mechanisms. So at times I deal with things in that way. And as we grow older and we grow more emotionally mature and we develop as humans, we want to keep pushing through those barriers and learning how to not let them snag us and pull us back. So the first way that we do that is by calling it by its name. So we become aware, what are your negative coping mechanisms? I'm sure right off the bat you're already thinking, yeah, I already know what mine is. You know, it could be alcohol, it could be drugs, it could be smoking, it could be eating, it could be laziness, you know, whatever it could be. So we're going to get really aware of those. So we have an exercise in the workbook that's called Call It By Its Name. And grab your journal out and let's start to get through it. What are your negative thought patterns? Negative thought pattern would be something like every time you come up to a point where you have to financially invest in something, you constantly tell yourself, I can't afford this. I can't do it because I can't afford it. That is a negative coping mechanism. Some things are very expensive. Some things are free. Don't let it stop you. Keep pressing forward, even if it's just a little bit. Just keep pressing forward. What are your personal negative behavioral patterns? So a negative behavioral pattern could be something like, oh, I get stressed out. I go to a bar. I spend $75 on alcohol. I get drunk, I do something that I regret, then I come home, I throw up, I have a hangover the next day, and then I eat bad food, and it takes me 3 or 4 days to recover from that. That is a negative behavioral pattern. So what are your negative behavioral patterns? How do you experience fear, anxiety, and self-doubt? So throughout my life, that has always varied. One of the biggest ones that I've had in my life is I experience anxiety to a point of panic attacks. And so if I can be self-aware of that, then I can do the things, I can take positive coping mechanisms, grounding meditations, whatever I can in this time that I know that I'm going to be experiencing this anxiety, this potential panic attack, and I can soothe myself ahead of time to try to get around it, get around that roadblock. What thoughts come up for you in times of fear? What are your positive coping mechanisms, things that you've done in the past and that can help you sidestep these inevitable pushbacks? So we're going to go through and we're going to become super self-aware. We're going to call it by its name. We're not going to just pretend that that part of us does not exist. There is a light and dark half of everything. There is a yin and yang of everything. And the more that we can become aware of that entire cycle that lives within ourselves, that lives within this planet and also in the moon, the more that we can become aware of all of that, the more successful as human beings that we're going to be. And the easier it's going to become, or the less hard it's going to become for us to succeed in our goals and intentions. So we go through that, and then we come to another optional journaling exercise, which comes with automatic writing. So there will be the next page after that will explain what automatic writing is and how you can do that. And then we go through and we start to ask questions. And this is optional. If you feel like you're good and you're not needing that extra support, then this one is optional. But we ask a question and then we sit there in our automatic writing and we just let the hand go and say whatever it needs to say. And this can be one of the best ways to really get into the unconscious, the subconscious, the higher self, and just see what flows from there. So we're not thinking about what we're trying to write. We're just writing and seeing what comes out. So that is our first quarter moon with our 2 different exercises and our automatic writing. And so just remember, we all have that light and dark side. We all have our negative coping mechanisms. We all have our fears and our anxieties. We all have all of those things. So how can you become self-aware of that so that you can bust through it? Let's make some solid action steps with this first quarter. What are your solid action steps? Let's do it. All right, great to see you, and I'll see you guys. Next phase is the waxing gibbous, and I'll see you then. Bye.